16. And we, sleeping or awake in the night, hoped in our hearts that ere the morning a voice would go forth to proclaim the tidings of the Messiah over the hills and valleys. And rising at sunrise, we would behold the children of Israel, gathered hither from all the ends of the world, and encamped about the foot of the mount. But there went forth no voice from heaven, neither did Elijah come leaping over the hills, and there was no bearer of tidings, and the day that followed was like unto all the other days, and the world was as yesterday and the day before. And when we arose that morning, we, the disciples, were a-hungered, for the last of the bread was gone from our sacks, and the summer had come, and the land withered, and there came none to refresh the Messiah. And we were upon the Mount Pamius, above the city of Caesarea, of the kingdom of the Herod Philip. And the Herod Philip was a just king, and left us in peace. And daily we looked down from the mount to see the women come to the cave, whence issueth the spring of the Jordan, and where the goddess hath her grove. And the women brought their offerings of white meal, and cruses of oil, and jars of wine, and doves, and incense, and flowers. And on the mount was the Messiah of God, and he was a-hungered and thirsty, and had not where to lay his head. Then we arose from that place, and went further. But the Rabbi brought us not into the blessed cities of Israel, upon which the sanctity resteth. But we hoped that when he would reveal himself to the people, then his holy reign would begin. But he led us further among the cities of the Gentiles, which are beyond Gennesaret. And it was thus, when we came into one of the cities, we closed our eyes and stopped our ears, that we might not see the abominations of the Gentiles, nor hear their songs and laughter. But we sought out the tents of Jacob. And we came among our brothers in each place, and into Jewish homes, and rested under Jewish roofs, and ate Jewish bread. And they took us for a rabbi and his disciples, for our rabbi's command was strictly upon us to conceal the thing from men. And the people know not that Messiah was among them. And there was a division between us and our rabbi, as though a curtain of fire had descended from heaven. For behold, he was still our rabbi, as we had known him, to whose words we had listened yesterday and the day before, and in whose presence we were blessed to be, and who broke bread with us and was gracious unto us. Yet he was likewise another, as if the light of God had fallen upon him, to hide him from us, 1 hand's breadth revealed, and 2 hands' breadths concealed, and we saw him and saw him not. And in those days we came to Gedera, on the further side of Gennesaret. And the city was filled with Gentiles, and it contained many open places and gardens, likewise many temples with their idols, and the greatest among them was the temple of their abomination Zeus, whom the people of the city chiefly worshipped. Nevertheless, they worshipped also other idols, their own and alien. And every vain idol had its temple in the city, which was mighty and opulent. There were temples for the god Re, the sun god of the Egyptians, and for Astra, the goddess of the Zidonians. And every temple had its priests and priestesses, and the sacred men and sacred women who followed them. And the markets and the shops were filled with harlots. And when we came to the city, it was the festival of their chief god Zeus, and the men and women of the city were garbed in festive garments of many colors, some in costly purple, and some in tender violet, and others in pale lily, such as the Zidonians make cunningly. And they went out in bands to their temples, and the players on instruments went before every band. There marched at the head the trumpeters. After them came the flute players, and those that made the cymbals clash. And to the sound of this music they led the sacrifices to the gods. The horns of the animals were adorned, some with wreaths of gold, others with olive wreaths, and the oxen were behung with costly ornaments. And maidens and youths, their heads adorned with roses, danced about the sacrifices. And the priestesses followed, and their bodies were wreathed in costly coverings of thin stuffs, and the folds thereof were cunningly disposed, both concealing and revealing the nakedness of their bodies, that they might awaken the more the lust of the beholders. And after them came the hero of the day, a youth in the flower of his years, who had that day obtained first place in their races, and he was wholly naked, save that he wore upon his head the wreath of victory, which was of olive leaf. And to him, the hero of their races, they accorded greater honor than to all the priests and priestesses, and they delighted in the nakedness of his body and the strength of his muscles, and they praised the depth of his breast and the straightness of the lines of his hips, and the men and women admired the might of his arms and his legs and his manhood, and they threw flowers before him, and they stretched out their hands and cried to him as to a god, Adonis, Adonis, which meaneth, Thou beautiful one. And then after him came the people, men and women mingled, bearing fruits and flowers, and their demeanor was base and abominable, such as would not be tolerated in Israel. And we were thrust aside by the multitude, and pressed to a wall. And among us was the anointed one of God, and none recognized him, and none knew of him. And I looked upon my rabbi's countenance, and it was pale, even as it had been on that day in Tyre, amid the rejoicings and the abominations about the idol of Moloch, and his lips trembled, and his eyes burned with the fire of God. And we thought now, of a surety, he that possesseth so the power of God would from this point on begin his reign. And we waited for the miracle, and for the cry which would issue from his lips, where it lay ready. But he did but murmur to himself. And I, inclining mine ear, heard him utter the words which God's finger had written on the wall in Babylon, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And I understood him, and contained myself in patience. And it was thus with us, that we began now to perceive the deeds of our rabbi in another light, and we began to understand.